Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran, and today we are taking a look at some leaked footage from the Ukrainian assault brigade as they conduct armored operations against Russian forces. Don't worry, YouTube. This is from The Sun, who, of course, posts combat content all the time on your platform. So you definitely shouldn't demonetize me for this. I've also checked it. There's nothing that violates your terms of service, but I know you're going to probably demonetize it anyway. All right, well, let's get into it. Hopefully we can show it. I did have to mute it because they also use copyrighted music just to make this even more hopeless. So we're going to talk about, of course, how you can use tanks on defensive operations, because in the last several months, if you guys have been following my daily updates at all, you know that the Russian forces have been the ones primarily on the offensive. Ukrainian forces have been conducting largely defensive operations, presumably as they prepare for their major counteroffensive here in the spring. So as you can see, these are some pretty dated looking tanks. While some appear to be newer, like T-72s, there's a lot of what look like even older tanks from like the 60s. But you can't judge a tank. You should only judge a tank or any military operation against what it's fighting and what it's being used for. And a good example is, well, imagine you're a Russian mobilized soldier in a trench line. A tank from the 1960s is a dangerous, panic-inducing sight. Now, is it dangerous and panic-inducing if you're, an Abrams crew? Probably not. It's like a shooting gallery to you. But again, they're not facing down Abrams. They're not facing down T-90s by and large. And so Ukraine has become quite good at using these tanks and roles in the battlefield, especially defensive roles that are effective, even if their technology isn't up to modern NATO standards. Right. So we've got some shots of them engaging, and right. So you can see what they're using these for. Okay, wait, let's back it up. We got that great view of the tactical situation. Okay, so you notice how here is the tank in the tree line engaging targets in this open field. And this is, I think, emblematic of how this can be used. So we know that Russian forces have generally been advancing on Ukrainian positions using what are called assault detachments. And these assault detachments are meant to break strong points using a combination of fires and light infantry frontal assaults. But the frontal assaults depend on fire superiority. That is to say, getting the Ukrainians in the trench line or bunker that they're trying to assault, getting their heads down, getting them what the Soviet manuals called fire defeat of the enemy, what we call, I think suppressed or combat ineffective. So we're engaging in this, they're engaging in this suppressive fire using their tanks. But as they're doing that, those Russian forces are going to be advancing into the towards the Ukrainian positions. But here's the interesting thing. First, as they advance, the Ukrainians may have tanks pre-positioned in areas behind the battlefield, allowing them to engage, especially somewhere like this, right? So if this is the contested area, let's say, I would assume if this is a Ukrainian tank, and I would assume Russia is going to advance from this direction down this forest, what they call forest protection zone, to a Ukrainian trench line right here, let's say, again, as a hypothetical. So you would have your armored forces positioned here in the tree line. Why? Because the Russians, there's no chance they're going to advance through an open field. And if they do, they're going to advance through an open field under fire from one or more armored vehicles and under fire from Ukrainian defensive positions here. So they'll be caught in an absolutely lethal crossfire. So this tank is actually probably relatively secure in this location. It could also be literally Russians advancing this way from tree line to tree line, but I kind of doubt it. So as Russian forces advance, Ukrainians, even if they are taking significant indirect fire and can't engage targets themselves, what they can do is lean back on their armored forces to provide like semi-indirect fire support, right? So the tank will probably be in this instance in like a direct fire mode, and it'll start putting rounds, basically creating their own wall of fire in front of the Ukrainian trenches in order to prevent the light infantry assault element from actually reaching the trenches. Instead, they'll be stuck in the open, right? And then when Ukrainian forces are able to regain their composure, right? When the Russian artillery stops, because it has to stop when their light infantry are close. Think about it. They're Russians, but they're not going to drop arty on their own targets. So the arty stops. The light infantry have not reached the trench line because they're pinned by these tanks. And then they are stuck in the relative open as Ukrainian forces in these trenches get to engage them with small arms. So it can be super effective to have these sort of tanks in these support roles, supporting other strong points somewhat behind the lines. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Yep, you can see they're engaging targets in these forested areas. And again, it's not an accident. It's because that's where Russians are advancing. That's where they're trying to push Ukrainian strong points off of the field. And again, this open terrain, it's no man's land because it is so hard to advance with light infantry. And you can see, yeah, imagine again, oh, this is a perfect shot, right? So you can see they're landing here and here. So again, I sort of suspect that it could be this is the Ukrainian trench line. It could also be that this is covering a withdrawal as Ukrainians pull back to a secondary trench line and prepare to counterattack. Very, very easy. It's much easier to dislodge an enemy who has just taken terrain because oftentimes your own terrain is not as secure. But yeah, I would, or again, it could just be simply Russian forces in these trench lines and these trench lines, and they're trying to make a third advance. But you can just see, again, imagine you're a Russian Wagner Group soldier, a recently mobilized Russian, and you are trying to sneak through the forest and conduct a frontal assault on a Ukrainian trench line. And then suddenly you just take round after round of this tank fire. And the tanks know, because they're on a defensive position, they already know where the Ukrainians are. It's a trivial matter to do friend and foe identification because the Ukrainians are in their trenches and the tanks already know where the trenches are. So as long as they say, hey, Russians are advancing along the front or, 300 meters in front of our trench line, the tanks know exactly where to put their rounds. And again, you don't need to be an M1 Abrams to do this. You can be a T-64 and do this. You can see them here moving into position, right? Again, 3 tanks can't really be that effective as a offense, but as a defensive effort in support of light infantry, like strong points, so effective, guys, so effective. Again, the ability to just have this tank cover a big wide open area to deny it to the Russians, forcing them into these tree line areas where, again, they'll be able to be much more easily pinned in place. Not more easily, they'll be also able to be pinned in place thanks to the tanks. Okay, we may get a little more evidence here. You see this vehicle? Look, this vehicle looks like it's conducting withdrawal. So I think this is actually the tanks providing covering fire as Ukrainian forces withdraw to a tertiary tank position or a tertiary set of bunkers. So maybe Russians have again conducted an assault and the call was made, hey, you're going to withdraw to your secondary line of defense, and the tanks just begin to drop rounds onto the Russian positions. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Of course, if this gets demonetized or if it doesn't, right, I also got booted off Patreon. But if you want access to the more intense combat footage, that is on the Patreon. Or excuse me, it's not on the Patreon. It's on combatvetnews.com. This is my own site. I have all these news updates for free. I have all my YouTube videos for free on here. And of course, you can become a member and get access to members only content. This is, of course, all the GoPro footage, the POV combat footage, all of it that you can get access to if you become a member. It's a huge help to me in the channel. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next one.